This is Andrew. For example, I've had experience with Don and Sarah, those interpreters sitting in the back. So we had human gross anatomy. It was last spring quarter. And the class itself is, taking apart a cadaver and examining it. So you have a human body there on the slab. And so these two interpreters were working with me, and there were 3 hearing people and myself. Okay, 2 hearing people, and we were at one table with the body. And it's a lab, as I said. So the 2 hearing students were there, and we have an interpreter, and the 2 interpreters would switch off. There was 3 hours of instruction in the lab in the morning. It was hard because you had to look at the body, look at the interpreter, and then sometimes the hearing student would talk, and I would try to look at them, and we're supposed to be looking at the body and examining the organs or whatever we were trying to dissect at the time. It was difficult for me to look up and look down, and sometimes I'd be looking down and I'd just sign something to the interpreter, trying to jump in, and it's hard to communicate without eye contact, so it was a real challenge. I was thankful that I had both of these interpreters with me because we all worked together, and we figured things out. And the hearing students were very willing to repeat what they had said, and they were willing to work with me. So our group dynamic was amazing. And I'm glad I took that class. It was very difficult, but it was all visual, and it was very active. It was a hands-on learning experience. So you could see all of these different parts of the body at the same time. The interpreters were there. So sometimes it was very overwhelming. The professor would arrive. I wouldn't know that professor had arrived, and I'd have to say, I'm sorry, could you repeat yourself again? And the professor was always very flexible in repeating themselves. So people took the time and effort to communicate, and the interpreters were involved in that process the whole way. It was a challenge. Another thing is that it really depends on who the students are in the group. Some students are not willing to work with deaf people. It doesn't matter what their hearing or deaf status is, or hearing status is. Most of the time, it's really not a problem here at RIT. The groups work out fine. I took one class called Material Science that had a lab. So you had to perform experiments in a group on different materials. So you had to do different tests and take different readings and look for specific values, and the professor would be speaking at the same time. You had to write a report on this lab, and you had to talk about all these different materials. So
I would volunteer for the reader role, or a role where I had a little more control to make sure that the information would have to go through me, and I would be guaranteed then to be up to date on what our team was doing. I wouldn't mind reading. I would read the numbers and off to the interpreter and whatever we were testing, because I knew that then they would have to follow me. And so you had to become more assertive, and I took the lead on several projects. So that was one strategy. As far as communication with my peers, most of the hearing students honestly are afraid. They're very nervous. And so I take the approach where I always have to be, I always take the approach, and I try to be the person who approaches them first. So I'd be very friendly. I come into the classroom. I sit down. When the interpreter arrives, I'll engage the interpreter to start interpreting before class and chat with the students so that I'm on good footing already. It's important to be friendly and to make your classmates feel comfortable, because that will improve the team communication later.